She was 2 steps from the bin. That was how close she came to walking past it. 2 steps. The kind of distance that, depending on which way you move, either changes nothing or changes everything. Jamila stopped walking. The trash bags in her hands dripped with rainwater. The storm had been building for an hour, the kind of soul storm that doesn't announce itself gradually, but arrives all at once, like something that has been waiting for permission and finally stopped asking. The service alley behind the east tower was flooded to her ankles. The street lamp at the far end threw a single cone of amber light that the rain kept trying to put out. She was late. She was soaked. She had stayed past her shift because a supply cart had tipped in the loading bay, and she refused. She had always refused to leave a mess for morning. She was 2 steps from the bin when she heard it. Not the rain hammering the concrete, not the thunder splitting itself open across the Seoul skyline, not the wind throwing its full weight against the alley walls the way it did on nights like this, like something that had been locked out and was furious about it. Something else. She went completely still. There it was again, faint, fractured, barely there. A sound that had already been fighting for a long time and was running out of fight. A sound that her body recognized before her mind could catch up, the way certain sounds bypass every layer of thought and go straight to whatever is oldest and most instinctive in a person. She dropped the bags. She ran. The bin was at the far end of the alley, against the wall, lid half lifted by the wind. She grabbed it with both hands and threw it back, and the rain poured straight in, and she saw it. In the world she had known until that exact second, simply stopped. Not paused, stopped. And restarted, a breath later, in a rhythm she had never felt before. A baby girl, newborn, wrapped in a cloth that had been soaked through to nothing, skin the color of something that should have been warm and wasn't. Mouth open, the cry that had pulled Jamila across that flooded alley already fading, already almost gone. She grabbed her. She pressed the tiny body against her chest and tilted the baby's head back and covered that tiny nose with her lips, and she breathed. Moya. Mbili. 1, 2. The way her first aid instructor had taught her. Always count out loud, always in the language your body knows when it is afraid, because the voice keeps the rhythm, and the rhythm keeps the mind from breaking. She pressed 2 fingers to the baby's chest, the size of her palm, the size of a prayer. She counted. She pressed. She breathed. Moja, mbili, tatu, net. The rain screamed against every surface in that alley. Her tears fell onto the baby's face, and she could not tell anymore which was which, the rain or the grief or the refusal, because she was refusing, with everything she had. With hands that had cleaned other people's floors for 3 years in a country that did not know her name, she was refusing to let this end the only way the world had decided it would. Please, she said, between counts, not to anyone she could name, to everything. Please, not this one, not this baby, please. The baby girl coughed. Then she screamed, loud, furious, completely, magnificently, impossibly alive, and the sound of her cut straight through the storm and filled the alley, and Jamila folded over her, shaking, sobbing, unable to stop. Uko salama, she whispered. Swahili. The first words this baby would ever hear. You are safe. She did not know yet whose baby this was. She did not know yet that somewhere above her, 12 floors up, in the building whose floors she cleaned, whose lobbies she mopped at 5 a.m. before the residents woke, a woman was sitting in a quiet room, having just made a decision that she would spend the rest of her life defending. A woman with silver hair and a composed face, and eyes that had not wavered once through 14 months of careful, deliberate architecture. She did not know yet that across the city, in an office with no signage and blacked-out windows, a man was looking at a photograph and picking up a phone. She did not know that the answer to a question nobody had dared to ask was screaming in her arms, alive when the world had arranged for her not to be. She only knew one thing. She was not letting go. Before we go any further, I want you to sit with that question for a moment. If you had been the one in that alley, if you had been the one to hear that sound, that specific, broken, barely there sound, to run toward it instead of away from it, to throw back that lid and see what Jamila saw, what would you have done? Not what you think you would have done, what you actually would have done, alone, in the rain, in the dark, in a city that had never once made room for you. Take a second, because the answer to that question is the entire story. And what Jamila did next didn't just change her life, it cracked open a world that had been running in secret for 14 months and sent everything in it into freefall. If you're new here, welcome. This is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. Like this video so more people find it, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand why Jamila Wanjiru was in that alley, on that night, in a city that had never once made room for her, holding a baby that the most powerful woman in Seoul had decided should not exist, you have to go back to the place that made her. Not just to Seoul, but to the woman she was before Seoul taught her that invisibility has a price she hadn't finished paying. You have to go back to Nanyuki, to a town at the foot of a mountain that never moves, to a market full of red earth and early mornings, and a woman who arranged onions with the precision of someone who understood that dignity lived in the details, to the girl who watched all of it, quietly, completely, and decided, before anyone told her she was allowed to, that the world's arrangement of things was a problem to be solved, not a wound to be carried. That is where this story actually begins. Nanyuki is a town that sits at the foot of Mount Kenya, and on clear mornings, the kind that arrive after a night of rain, when the air has been scrubbed clean of everything that isn't essential, the mountain is so present, so immediate, that it feels less like a geographical feature and more like a decision, like something that chose to be exactly where it is and has never once reconsidered. Jamila grew up watching that mountain from the doorway of her family's house on the eastern edge of the market quarter. She watched it the way she watched everything, quietly, completely, with the particular attention of a child who has understood early that the world contains more information than most people bother to collect. Her mother sold vegetables in the market. She had done so for 23 years with the quiet authority of a woman who knows the exact value of everything she touches. Not just the tomatoes and the sukuma wiki and the small, perfect onions she arranged each morning with a precision that was its own form of pride, but the value of time, of effort, of the specific dignity available to a person who shows up before dawn and does not complain about it. She never told Jamila to work hard. She simply worked every day in full view and let that be the lesson. Her father repaired shoes in a narrow shop 2 streets from the market. He had hands that moved with the slow, deliberate certainty of someone who understood that rushing a thing did not make it better, it only made it faster. He could look at a worn sole and tell you not just what was wrong with the shoe, but something about the person who wore it, how they moved through the world, where they placed their weight, what they were carrying. Jamila was the second of 3 children and the one who watched. Her brother talked, her sister laughed. Jamila observed. The market, the customers, the gaps between what people said and what they meant, and filed everything away in the part of her mind that was always, quietly, calculating. She was not angry about the life her family had. She was not resentful. She simply looked at it clearly, the way her father looked at a worn sole, and identified what needed fixing. The decision to go to Seoul was not a dream. She was not a woman who confused dreaming with planning. It was a calculation. Her cousin Wambui had gone 2 years before and was sending money home from a cleaning contract in Mapo district. Enough to matter, enough to be real. A work visa, 2 bags, a phone number written on a folded piece of paper that Jamila kept in her coat pocket for the entire 14-hour flight and did not let go of once. She did not know yet that staying small had a cost she hadn't finished paying. She was about to find out. Seoul hit her like a wall of glass and cold, and the particular indifference of a city that has decided, precisely and without apology, exactly who it is for. Not her. That was clear within the first week. Not in a way that was hostile. Hostility would have been easier, would have given her something to push against. It was subtler than that. It was the way the city simply continued around her, the way eyes moved past her face without registering it, the way spaces contracted slightly when she entered them and expanded again when she left, as though she were a weather event rather than a person. Temporary, passing, not worth adjusting to. Jamila adjusted to it instead. That was what she did. That was what she had always done. She found the shape of the available space and she fit herself into it with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a woman who had long ago decided that adaptation was not surrender. It was intelligence. 3 cleaning contracts within the first 2 months. A hotel in Mapo, an office complex in Yoido, where she worked the early shift before the lawyers arrived and pretended the floors cleaned themselves. And a residential rotation in Gangnam. 3 buildings, different nights, the kind of work that required you to be present everywhere and visible nowhere. She learned Korean from the radio in the service elevator, the 5 a.m. broadcast, news and weather, and the particular cadences of a language that rewards patience. She practiced in the empty corridors, quietly, between floors, speaking to no one. Getting better anyway. Money went home every month. Not much. Enough. That was the calculation she had made in Nanyuki, and she kept it with the same precision her father kept his tools. Clean, accounted for, never wasted. Then the Black Meridian Tower. It came through the agency as a straightforward reassignment. A high-end residential complex in Socho needed a reliable cleaner for the service floor rotation, and Jamila had the best attendance record on the books. She took it without hesitation. The money was marginally better. The hours fit. She understood within the first week that this building was different. Not different in any way she could have named immediately. It was the cleanest building in her rotation, the coldest, with marble lobbies that reflected everything and revealed nothing, and security personnel who were too precise, not attentive the way professional security was attentive, but watchful, the way people were watchful when the thing they were protecting was worth protecting, in ways that didn't appear in any official documentation. The residents never made eye contact. Not shyness, not arrogance. The deliberate, practiced non-acknowledgement of people who had learned that seeing the staff meant the staff could see you back. She noticed the floor she was told never to clean unaccompanied. She noticed the visitors who arrived after midnight and left before dawn. She noticed the particular silence of the East Corridor on certain nights. Not empty silence, but managed silence. The silence of something that had been arranged. She filed it all away. She kept her head down. She had no framework yet for what she was inside. She was building one, slowly, without knowing it. It happened on a Tuesday, the way most things that matter happen. Quietly, without announcement, in the middle of an ordinary night. Jamila was on the 14th floor. She was not supposed to be on the 14th floor unaccompanied. That had been made clear to her on her first day by the building supervisor, a compact man named Mr. An, who delivered instructions with the brisk efficiency of someone who had learned that the fewer words used, the fewer questions asked. 14 requires authorization. You will always be accompanied. You will never enter without clearance. She had nodded. She had not asked why. She had learned long before Seoul that the question why was a luxury available to people whose position made it safe to ask. But the service elevator that night had stopped at 14 on its own, a mechanical hesitation, the kind that old elevators made in tall buildings, and the doors had opened onto a corridor that was not empty. She did not step out. She stood in the elevator and she looked. The door at the far end of the corridor was open, not wide, ajar, the way doors were left when the person who closed them was in a hurry or expected to return quickly. The light from inside fell in a narrow strip across the corridor floor, and through that strip of light came a conversation. 2 voices, Korean, low and deliberate, the specific register of men discussing something they have no reason to hide because they are in a place where they believe they cannot be heard. She did not move. She did not breathe loudly. She was very good at this. at the particular stillness of a person who has spent years being invisible and understands that invisibility is not merely about being unseen, but about being unfelt, about occupying space so quietly that the space forgets you are in it. She heard enough. She did not understand all of it. Her Korean was functional, not fluent, and the vocabulary in that corridor was not the vocabulary of the 5 a.m. radio broadcast, but she understood the shape of it, the weight of it, the way certain conversations had a gravity that pulled at the air around them regardless of the specific words being used. And then one of the men moved toward the door, and she stepped back and let the elevator close and went to the ground floor and finished her shift. On the way out, she passed the lobby. There was a newspaper on the security desk, folded open to a business page, a photograph. A man in a dark suit at what appeared to be a property development announcement. Clean background, careful smile, the assembled presentation of someone who had decided precisely how the world would see him. She recognized the face. She walked out of the building into the cold Seoul night, and she did not stop walking until she reached the bus stop, and then she stood there for a long time without sitting down. She did not report it. She did not speak of it. She placed it in the part of her mind reserved for things that were not her concern, and she kept it there, and she went back to work the following night and the night after that. On her way into the building the next evening, the security guard at the desk looked up from his monitor as she badged in. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than he ever had before. Then he looked back at his screen. He did not speak. He did not need to. She had been inside danger for longer than she knew. She understood that now. What she did not yet understand was that the danger already knew her name. To understand what was placed in that bin, you have to understand the woman it was taken from. Kim T was 27 years old, and she lived on the 34th floor of the Black Meridian Tower, in an apartment that was, by every measurable standard, beautiful. The ceilings were high, the windows ran floor to ceiling, and at night the city spread below them like a circuit board, all light and geometry and the impression of order. The furniture had been chosen by someone with excellent taste and no particular interest in comfort. The rooms were large and clean and quiet, in the specific way that rooms are quiet when they have never been filled with the right kind of noise. Her marriage to Hugo Chi had not been arranged in the traditional sense. That word implied resistance overcome, two families pressing two unwilling people toward each other until proximity became inevitability. There had been no resistance. There had simply been a conversation between two sets of parents who understood that agreement and love were entirely separate categories and saw no practical reason to confuse them. Hugo was suitable. Kim T was suitable. The numbers, as her father had put it, with the satisfaction of a man concluding a clean transaction, were correct. Hugo was not cruel to her. She had understood early that this was the thing she was supposed to be grateful for, and she had tried, genuinely, to locate that gratitude and hold on to it. He did not insult her. He did not raise his voice. He did not make her feel small in any of the ways that the world had language for. He simply did not see her. She existed in his life the way the apartment's expensive furniture existed. Present, maintained, noted occasionally when something was out of place, otherwise unremarkable. The loneliness accumulated the way water accumulated in a place with no drainage. Not dramatically, not all at once. Quietly, steadily, until one morning she stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with her coffee going cold in her hands and realized she could not remember the last conversation they had shared that wasn't logistical. Then Madame Huo came. Hugo's mother arrived for dinner on a Wednesday evening with the composed ease of a woman who had never once in her life needed to announce herself before entering a room. She was small, silver-haired, dressed with the precise neatness of someone who had decided long ago exactly how the world would see her, and was not open to further discussion on the matter. She set her bag down. She kissed her son's cheek. She sat. Over dinner, in the measured tones of a woman presenting facts rather than constructing them, she mentioned something she had heard. A business associate of the Park Group, seen in the lobby of the Lotte Hotel. Twice in 2 weeks. With Kim T. Kim T set down her chopsticks. Hugo looked at her. Not with anger. Anger she could have worked with the expression of a man running a quiet internal calculation. He looked back at his mother, then back at his wife. And at dinner, 3 days later, in the specific quiet of a man who has never needed volume to make a room contract around his words, Hugo Chi said, "If a child ever comes into this house, I will need to know it is mine." Kim T went completely still. The room went completely still. And in that silence, though neither woman seated at that table knew it yet, the foundation of everything that followed was poured. Kim T looked at her own hands, flat on the table, and they were not shaking. She would think about that later, that they were not shaking. That the worst things, when they arrive, do not feel the way you imagine they would. They feel quieter, more permanent, like a door that has just been locked from the outside, with no sound at all. She found out on a Wednesday morning in March, in a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods from home, paying cash for a test she carried back inside her coat pocket like something that could detonate. She took it in the upstairs bathroom, with the door locked and the tap running. She sat on the cold tile floor, and she looked at it for a long time without moving. The tap kept running. Steam rose slowly, and the mirror above the sink disappeared into white fog. And still she sat there, the test in both hands, and she looked at what it was telling her, and felt the specific, terrible clarity of a woman receiving information she already knows will cost more than she can currently calculate. She was not confused about whose child it was. There had been one night, unexpected, almost accidental, one of the rare evenings when something almost human had moved between her and Hugo before the familiar distance reassembled itself. She knew exactly. There was no question. But Hugo's words were already in her head, placed there 3 weeks ago at a dinner table in a quiet voice that had not needed to be anything other than quiet to land with the force of something permanent. If a child ever comes into this house, I will need to know it is mine. She wrapped the test in tissue. She buried it under everything else in the bin. She stood up, turned off the tap, and looked at her own reflection as it reappeared slowly through the clearing fog. Then she made the only decision available to her. Nobody would know. Not yet. Not until she understood what knowing would cost. 7 months of systematic, exhausting concealment followed. The housekeeper was dismissed on a pretext, a small, invented complaint, handled cleanly, without drama. A cleaning rotation took her place, strangers who came twice a week and knew nothing about the woman whose floors they mopped. Prenatal vitamins ordered anonymously to a pickup point 2 streets away. Clothing chosen with careful daily precision, not dramatically loose, just enough. Every meal calculated. Every interaction with Hugo, which were few and conducted across the enormous, careful distance that had become the permanent geography of their marriage, navigated with the attention of someone crossing ice in the dark, testing each step before committing her full weight. She told no one. She was alone with it in a way that had its own specific texture. Not just the loneliness of the pregnancy itself, but the loneliness of carrying a secret that was also a life. A life that moved and kicked and existed inside her in the dark, and that she could not speak about to a single person on earth. Madame Huo arrived on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. She had her own key. She used it without apology, the way she did everything, as a statement of fact rather than an intrusion. Kim T was in the upstairs bathroom. 7 months along, her back against the sink, the loose dress she was wearing shifted in a way that left nothing to interpretation. She heard the sound in the doorway and turned. Madame Huo stood there. For a moment, just a moment before everything else, something moved across her face that was not calculation. Something older. Something that the body produces before the mind can intervene. Her eyes dropped to Kim T's stomach and softened, genuinely, the way eyes soften when they encounter new life and respond before strategy can redirect them. Then it was gone. Rerouted. Pressed beneath something practiced and deliberate. She went downstairs and made tea. She sat across from Kim T at the kitchen table, and she was quiet for a long time. And then she said she would handle everything. Her voice was warm, certain. the voice of a woman who had never once failed to manage what she said she would manage. Kim T looked at this woman's composed, certain face and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, that she was not entirely alone. She reached out and placed her hand over Madame Huo's on the table. The older woman did not pull away. She turned her hand over and squeezed once, brief, firm, the gesture of someone sealing an agreement. Kim T felt the warmth of it move all the way up her arm. She trusted her. Completely. With everything. That was the most devastating mistake of her life. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments which moment in Kim T's story hit you hardest. Was it the dinner table? The bathroom floor? Or this one? This moment of trust right here? Tell us below, because what comes next is worse. The storm arrived on a Thursday night without apology. That was how Seoul storms came in that season. Not building gradually, not offering the courtesy of warning, but arriving all at once, the sky simply opening itself and committing completely. By 9 o'clock the streets were empty, and the rain was the loudest thing in the world, and the wind threw itself against every surface it could find, with the focused aggression of something that had been patient for too long. Kim T had been in labor since 6. Pain, when it is serious, does not arrive gradually. It arrives the way serious things always arrive, as a sudden rearrangement of reality, after which everything that existed before it becomes theoretical. She gripped the headboard and she breathed the way she had read to breathe. In the quiet weeks of preparation she had conducted entirely alone, and it helped approximately nothing. Madame Huo arrived within 30 minutes. Not with an ambulance, with Dr. Shin Beck, a small, quiet man with careful hands and the permanently unsurprised expression of someone who had seen enough of the world's private business to have stopped registering any of it as remarkable. He set his bag down without speaking. He got to work with the efficient calm of a person for whom this was simply another task on a long and varied list. The labor went on for hours. Hours in which Kim T existed somewhere beyond ordinary sensation, in the raw, animal place the body goes when it takes over completely and the mind becomes simply a passenger. She called for her mother once, not deliberately, not consciously, just a sound that came from somewhere below thought. The oldest and most instinctive cry a human being makes. Her mother was in Daegu and knew nothing. Madame Huo held her hand. She said all the right things in all the right tones. And if you have ever been in a room where something irreversible is about to happen, where the air itself seems to have already shifted, where everything that is said and done feels slower than normal, as though the world knows what is coming, even if the people in it do not, then you already understand what the next few minutes in that room felt like. You already know the specific dread of watching a door close that will not open again. Stay with Kim T now, because she does not know what you know, and that is the most devastating thing about what happens next. At 11:43, the baby came. Small, pink, absolutely, furiously alive. She cried immediately, a full, clear, powerful cry that cut straight through the sound of the storm and filled the room completely. Kim T heard it, and something in her that had been clenched tight for 7 months released all at once, the way a thing releases when it has been held under pressure for longer than it was designed to hold. She reached out with shaking arms. "Rest first," Madame Huo said, stepping forward. "Let me hold her, please. You lost blood. Rest first." Dr. Shin's hand was already at Kim T's arm. The sedative was administered with the brisk, practiced efficiency of something that had been decided well in advance of this moment. Kim T felt the pull of it, fast, certain, and her arms, still reaching, went still. Her eyes closed. The room went quiet, except for the storm. Madame Huo looked down at the baby in her arms. The tiny fists clenched beside her face. The eyes closed, the mouth working with the reflexive urgency of someone entirely new to the world and already certain it owed her something. She looked at her for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something behind her eyes wavered. Genuinely, humanly wavered, the way it had in the bathroom doorway, the way it kept doing despite every effort to prevent it. She looked at Dr. Shin. He looked back at her. He understood. He had been paid to understand for many years without being asked to articulate it. She wrapped the baby in a kitchen cloth. She walked downstairs without stopping, without looking back, without allowing herself another 3 seconds of anything that lived below calculation. She got into the car. She drove through the rain with the focused efficiency of a woman executing the final stage of a plan she had been building for 14 months, and she did not permit herself to feel it as anything other than that. The service alley behind the tower's east wing, the bin at the far end, the lid. She drove back through the storm. She took the elevator to Hugo's study on the 22nd floor, and she stood in the doorway, and she told him, in the smooth, final voice that had always been the voice that closed things, there were complications. The child did not survive. Everything has been handled. Dr. Shin has filed the necessary documentation. There is nothing for you to manage. Hugo looked at his mother's face for a long moment. Then he said he was sorry. The door of his study closed softly behind her, and in the service alley, 4 floors below street level, on the east side of the building, a cleaning woman tied the last trash bag of the night, straightened up, and turned toward the bin. She was 2 steps away when she heard it. 3 weeks. That was how long Jamila Wanjiru secretly raised a newborn baby girl on the staff floor of the building she cleaned, completely alone, with no instruction manual, no support, and functionally no sleep. The first night was the most terrifying thing she had survived, and she had survived a 14-hour flight to a city that did not want her. 3 years of building a life from the margins of other people's spaces, and the specific ongoing terror of existing in a foreign country on paperwork that required constant maintenance and offered nothing in the way of security. None of that had prepared her for a newborn who needed feeding every 2 hours without negotiation, and had no interest in the fact that Jamila's shift started at 5 in the morning. Asha did not care about any of that. Asha cared about 2 things, warmth and milk, and communicated her needs regarding both at a volume that was extraordinary for something the size of a loaf of bread. Jamila learned fast. She had always learned fast. Within 4 days, she could distinguish the hunger cry from the discomfort cry, from the cry that meant nothing was technically wrong, but Asha had decided that being put down was not something she was willing to accept at this time. She bought formula in small quantities from 3 different shops across 2 neighborhoods, rotating so no single cashier saw her often enough to remember her face. Diapers from a market in Mapo, a soft blanket from a stall she would not visit again. She was systematic about it in the way she was systematic about everything, covering tracks she wasn't entirely sure needed covering, but understanding instinctively that what she was holding was not simply a baby. It was a secret. And whoever had put this baby in that bin had done so on purpose, which meant they were still out there, which meant the secret had weight and edges, and the specific danger of something that someone powerful wanted to stay buried. She thought about this in the hours between feeds, in the dark, while Asha slept against her chest. Then Asha would make a sound, not crying, not quite, just a small, unconscious declaration of continued existence, and Jamila would stop thinking about danger and simply hold her. The love arrived the way she had not expected love to arrive. Not gradually, not carefully, not in the measured, incremental way she had always approached everything that mattered. It arrived all at once, like stepping off a ledge into deep water, total immersion, no transition between surface and depth. It surprised her. She was not a woman given to sudden things. And then she understood that it wasn't sudden at all. This was something she had been carrying for a long time without a name for it, a particular hollow in her chest that had been present for years, that she had learned to work around, to not examine too closely, to treat as simply the shape of the life she had chosen. Practical, sufficient, enough. Asha found her thumb even in sleep. Every time, with the focused, instinctive certainty of someone who had identified the safest place available and intended to stay there. Every time it happened, Jamila felt it somewhere below the sternum, in the place where the hollow used to be. She needed more time. She knew that. She needed to understand what she was inside before the thing she was inside understood her. She needed to find out whose baby this was, what it meant, how to protect her. Not from the outside, not from the danger she could feel circling at a distance, but in a way that would hold. She was building something small and fierce and entirely unauthorized around this baby, and she knew it was temporary, and she built it anyway. She did not get more time. On a quiet Saturday evening, when the last of the other staff had pulled on their coats and clattered out into the cold, and the building had settled into its particular nighttime silence, Jamila heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Not hurried, not uncertain. The footsteps of someone who owned every surface they walked on. Madame Ho walked the staff corridor the way she walked every space she entered, with the unhurried certainty of a woman for whom ownership was not a legal concept, but a settled fact of character. She had taken the service elevator. She had not announced herself. These were not oversights. They were habits, and her habits were never accidental. She stopped outside Jamila's door. From behind it, a sound. Not crying. Something quieter than that. The soft, involuntary sound of a baby in the particular contentment of deep sleep. The sound of a small body that trusts completely and without condition that the world is warm and safe, and that the person who holds it will always come back. Madame Ho stood in the corridor, and she went very still. She knocked. Jamila opened the door. The two women looked at each other across the threshold, and the space between them filled immediately with everything that had not yet been said, which was enormous, which took up the entire corridor. "Whose child is that?" Madame Ho said. Not a question. The careful, controlled utterance of a woman who already knows the answer and needs to hear it spoken aloud to understand the precise dimensions of the situation she is now inside. Jamila told her. Exactly where, exactly when, exactly what condition the baby was in when she threw back that lid on the night of the storm 3 weeks ago. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform emotion. She simply delivered the facts with the flat, precise clarity of a woman who has had 3 weeks to decide what she will say when this moment arrives and has not wasted a single one of them. Madame Ho said nothing. Her hand tightened against the doorframe. The composure that had held through 14 months of careful architecture developed, in the muscles around her eyes and in the set of her jaw, a fracture. Not dramatic, not visible to anyone who had not spent 3 years learning to read what people were not saying. But Jamila had spent 3 years learning exactly that. From the lobby below, the sound of doors opening, footsteps in the stairwell, unhurried, certain. The footsteps of a man who had never once in his life entered a room uncertain of his right to be in it. Hugo Chi appeared at the end of the corridor. He took in his mother's fractured composure. He took in the Kenyan cleaning woman standing in the doorway who did not step back, did not drop her eyes, did not perform any of the deference that every person in proximity to him eventually performed, whether they intended to or not. He read it all in under 2 seconds. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. He walked toward them. Jamila looked at him directly, and she said, in Korean, plain and without preamble, "I found your daughter in the bin behind this building 3 weeks ago. I brought her back to life. She is in this room. Her name is Asha." Not a tremor. Not one. Hugo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the door. He walked into the room and stood in the doorway, and he saw her, Asha, sleeping in the center of the narrow bed in a nest of Jamila's folded jackets, one fist pressed against her cheek, entirely unaware of the earthquake gathering in the doorway around her. What happened to Hugo Chi's face in that moment was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was a man built entirely for control, encountering something that control was never designed to hold, and the encounter happening not with noise, but with silence. A profound, structural silence, the kind that precedes the rearrangement of everything. He looked at his daughter for a long time.
Then he turned to his mother. "Tell me," he said. 2 words, not a request. The statement of a man who has already understood that something vast has been concealed from him and has decided that the next minutes will contain all of it, every piece, regardless of the cost to anyone in the room, Madame Huo told him. Not as a confession, as a defense, the logic, the accusation, the doubt, the vulnerability an heir of uncertain parentage would represent in their world. She told it the way she had always told things, composed, reasoned, the argument of a woman who believed she was right and was simply facing the inconvenience of consequence. Hugo listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said very quietly, "You put my daughter in a bin." Then quieter, "You put my daughter in a bin." The second time landed in an entirely different register than the first. Lower. Slower. With the weight of something that had passed beyond anger into a place that had no name, but that changed the pressure in the room the way pressure changes before something serious occurs. He turned to Jamila. He made 2 calls, brief, precise, the kind of calls where the person on the other end does not ask questions because the voice making the request does not leave space for them. When he finished, he looked at her. "Your papers. Whatever the situation is. It's handled. You have my word." He left. 3 hours later, he sat on the edge of the bed in the room where Kim T lay awake in the dark, as she had lain awake every night for 3 weeks, replaying the sound she had heard in the corridor before the sedative took her. The sound Madame Huo had told her was the storm. The sound that had the specific, unmistakable frequency of a newborn's first cry. Hugo told her everything. Kim T lay completely still through every word. When he finished, she did not speak for a long time. Then her hands came up to cover her face. Slowly. The particular movement of a person whose endurance has run entirely out. Not collapsed, not broken, but simply finished. Spent completely. The structure that holds and holds and holds, and then, quietly, does not hold anymore. Pause here with us for a moment. Tell us in the comments. Which character are you most angry for right now? Jamila, who risked everything for a baby that wasn't hers? Kim Tai, who heard her daughter cry and was told she imagined it? Or Hugo, who is only now understanding the full cost of what was built around him without his knowledge? Tell us in the comment. The phone buzzed on the dresser sometime after midnight. Once, twice. The screen lit the dark room in short, cold pulses. Unknown number. And Jamila stood across from it for a moment before she crossed the room and picked it up. She answered without speaking. She waited. The voice on the other end spoke Korean with the flat, affectless precision of someone who had removed all warmth from their voice a long time ago as a professional choice, the way you remove a tool from a kit when you have decided it is no longer useful. Is this the woman who found the baby? Jamila said nothing. I have been looking for that child for 3 weeks, the voice continued. I want you to understand what you are currently standing in the middle of. She asked him to explain it. He declined. He told her she would understand more convincingly if she arrived at the understanding herself. Then the call ended. 41 seconds. Jamila stood in the dark holding the phone in both hands, and the city outside the window continued its business with complete indifference, and Asha slept behind her, making the small, trusting sounds of a baby who does not yet know that trust can be a dangerous thing to extend without information. His name was Liang Daiwan, former intelligence operative, current resident of the space that existed between the law and the people who had decided the law was a framework for other people. He had been circling the Black Meridian for 2 years, waiting for the fracture that would let him in. He had found it. He did not want Asha safe. He wanted her useful. A living child, documented and rescued, was the most precise instrument available against Madame Huo and everything she had spent a decade constructing. He would use her for exactly that purpose and no other. Before I tell you what Hugo found in that file at 3 in the morning, I need you to do something. Go back. Go back to the dinner table and Hugo's quiet words. Go back to the hotel lobby and the business associate seen twice in 2 weeks. Go back to every moment you have already witnessed in this story where one small piece of information arrived at exactly the right moment to cause exactly the right amount of damage. You thought those were separate events. You thought some of them were coincidence. What Hugo found in that file will show you that not one of them was. Not a single one. And once you see the full shape of it, you will not be able to unsee it. Here is what the fracture actually was. The business associate in the hotel lobby, the man seen twice with Kim T, the information delivered to Hugo with the composed certainty of established fact, was not a coincidence. His name was Park Sung-jin, a low-level operator carrying a debt that Madame Hu's intermediaries had quietly purchased 14 months prior and converted into a single obligation: be seen in the right place, at the right time, near Kim Tai, twice, and then disappear back into the city. The story that reached Hugo was not invented. It was assembled. Enough truth to survive scrutiny, enough ambiguity to be devastating, delivered at the precise moment when it would land with maximum and lasting damage. Madame Huo had identified the exact fracture point in her son. Not his cruelty. He had that, but cruelty could be argued with. His logic. A man who has built an empire on information will always, in the final moment, choose information over intimacy. She had simply provided the information she needed him to choose, at the moment she needed him to choose it, and then waited with the patience of a woman who thinks not in days or weeks but in seasons. 14 months. Not of reaction. Of construction. Hugo received the documentation at 3 in the morning. A single file, sent by the one person in his organization whose loyalty to him ran deeper than their loyalty to the woman who had built it. Financial records, communication logs, a timeline that assembled itself, item by item, into something that had only one possible shape when you stood back far enough to see it whole. He read it once. He sat completely still for a long time. Then he called his mother. She answered on the second ring. "I know," he said. Silence. "Not just Asha," he said. "All of it. 14 months. All of it." The silence that followed was different from every silence Madame Huo had ever deployed. Not composed, not calculating. Not the silence of a woman managing a situation. The silence of a woman who has been building a house of precise and careful architecture for a very long time and has just heard, clearly and without ambiguity, the sound of the first wall coming down. "I was protecting you," she said finally. "You were building me," he said. "There is a difference. And I think you have always known that." He ended the call. Across the city, in a service room with photographs of Nanyuki pinned carefully to the wall and a feeding station assembled with practical precision on the dresser, Jamila sat in the dark with Asha sleeping against her chest. One tiny hand had found her finger and closed around it, with the absolute focused grip of someone who has identified the safest place available and made a permanent decision about it. Jamila looked at this face. The face the world had tried to throw away. The face that had cost more than anyone in this story would ever fully account for. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pressed her lips to Asha's forehead and whispered into the dark. "Uko salama." Swahili. The first words this baby had ever heard, and the only promise Jamila had ever made that she intended to keep at any cost. "You are safe." Outside, Seoul moved. Liang Dae-won was making plans in a building with no signage and opaque windows. Hugo Chi was sitting in the dark understanding, for the first time, the full shape of what had been taken from him and what he intended to reclaim. Kim T was lying awake knowing her daughter was alive and 2 kilometers away and unreachable until morning. And Madame Huo was alone with the first wall down and the rest of them coming. And no plan, for the first time in 14 months, for what happened next. Asha slept, entirely unaware that she was the center of everything. Unaware that the people who loved her and the people who wanted to use her and the people who had tried to erase her were all, at this exact moment, moving. That is where we leave them tonight. Part 2 is coming, and the most dangerous thing in this story has not yet shown itself.